it's that combination of your heart breaking over and over, but also love for this world, love for the world that is our only home, and to reconcile both what it is and what we wish it to be, and the fact that we won't have it forever. I think that was the question that, for me, linked all of it. How to live in this world, how to choose, how to love.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
First of all, let me just start by saying, Maddie, it's a pleasure to be doing this with you. Thank you so much for your brilliant book, and thank you so much for gracing us with this conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, and I'm so excited we get to have this conversation, and thank you to everyone for coming out. I'm trembling, actually. I'm going to try not to have my voice shake, but it's, yes, it's very emotional for me.
Do you want to talk about that, actually? Do you want to talk about, it's been a while.
Yeah.
You know, and I say this as someone who's a few years behind on a book deadline, which is to say that sometimes a book begins, but you don't know where it's going to take you. This is the book that took you to Berlin, took you to Lisbon, it took you to places where you walked in footsteps of people that you are in conversation with, and you literally wanted to see the spaces they inhabited. And then I think that there's something about that process that's very private. It feels like a working through a private thought. The book is out now. There's a public processing of that thought. How does that change your relationship with the book?
It's true, it took 9 years. When I started, I knew it would be a long process, but I didn't know what the book was. All I knew that I wanted to rethink a lot of the ideas that I held. I wanted to look at the philosophies and ideas that had changed me. And I wanted to write about a father and daughter in a building made of time. But how all of that fit together and what it even meant, I didn't know. I feel grateful that I got to live with these characters for as long as I did. And even though it's been a long time, it's hard to let them go. I'm very happy they're out in the world. But I do miss their company a little when it was just us.
Yeah, I have to imagine so. Especially with the kind of character that Lena is and where we meet her. Because we meet her in a place where she's taking care of her dad while he's taking care of her. You know, I found myself jealous about how much her dad was externalizing his internal life. Did that come naturally to you, to sort of write parents who are, maybe hell-bent on sharing the ideas that shape them? Because I found myself thinking, how would I be a different person if that was the context I grew up in?
That is very perceptive, because I had parents who did not share those things. Partly circumstance, they were working many jobs. They left us, I was the youngest. They left me in the company of books. So books were my companions and babysitters. But I think what I drew on with the father in the book is this intense, rich inner life, complex life that has left many worlds behind and can't quite reconcile them.
I think it's a testament to the body of work that you produced, that you said a building made of time, and the whole room was like, yeah, all right, we're on board with this, because and I mean that. I mean because you are working with a lot of abstractions, and so I want to go into those abstractions a little bit, because where we meet Lena, she's at a place called the Sea it's not a sea, it's a building. However, the building is at sea, and we are in the future, but we are regularly in conversations with the past because of some interesting neighbors that Lena has at the sea. Do you want to describe the setting that we're in?
Yes. We know that Lena, at the age of 7, has left with her father in a rush from their home in southern China. It seems to be because of climate, but other things come to light about the work her father was doing. And in the rush of packing, her father grabbed 3 books off a bookshelf from a series for teenagers called The Great Lives of Voyagers. And the 3 volumes he takes are about Hannah Arendt, Baruch Spinoza, and the Chinese poet Dufu. And these are the only 3 books that Lena has for the next 7 years. In the sea, most people in this building, most people arrive only momentarily for a day or 2 and leave again because they're looking for a more stable home. And the sea is not that place. And it turns out there are some others who cannot yet move on, like Lena and her father. And these neighbors are echoes of echoes, or they seem to know quite a lot about Arendt, Spinoza, and Dufu.
I will return to the 3 that you've chosen to be in conversation with for a moment, but we do get a little bit of insight into how this series itself was, as you just mentioned, about 80 books. Did you have to cut people? Did you have to cut other thinkers and say, I can't put you in this book, I'm going to have to bench you?
I wish I'd had so much control, because what it was that I had made this sea, and I was looking for neighbors to be with Lena, to offer her companionship, to think about what it means to educate a child, to give her something to carry into the future. And not everyone that I wanted to stay in the sea wanted to stay in the sea. These 3 unpacked their suitcases, settled in, but I had others that I hoped would live there, and it wasn't for them.
I'm going to have to go deeper into that, obviously, and I'm asking this because so you have this beautiful line where we talk about voyagers who do not cross seas, but voyagers of the mind, and so those are the people that you are working with, thinkers who maybe shift something in Lena's understanding, perhaps your understanding. In the molding of this book, I have to imagine over a 9-year process, you got to think about inviting some thinkers in, thinkers that you wanted to stay in the sea, but say, this is maybe not the space for this. Do you want to name some of those people?
No.
Maddie said, the book is the book. You're not getting another book.
Well, because it's my failure that I couldn't quite make the room that would entice them to stay. And some of them were writers, novelists, fiction writers, but they had other things they wanted to do, and not everyone wanted to. At first, not everyone wanted to stay and be with this 14-year-old girl all the time, or from the ages of 7 to 14, and not all of them wanted to talk to the others who were already there. So it was a kind of always it was a shifting space, but maybe in another way, the people I wished were there still lived there in a way in my subconsciousness as the ideas that were in the air.
I'm interested in the ways that space plays into these thinkers and the ways that they inform the maybe conclusions that you arrived at with them. And I say this because you didn't just write about Hannah Arendt. You went to Lisbon to see the apartment that she stayed in for 4 months after she was fleeing and on her way to Paris, I believe, was it?
She left Paris, then went down to the south of France, and then through Spain to Lisbon, and then a boat across the Atlantic.
Tell me about the way that those journeys factored into the writing of this book.
Well, you know, with Hannah, there was many trips across different years to spend time in, I went to Gers, the camp where she was interned in 1940. She was one of only, I think, 60 women of 6,000 who left in this very brief period when it was possible to leave, when France fell, but before Nazi Germany had taken control of this camp. Therefore, she's one of the very few to survive. She walked out, she went to the town of Montauban. I spent quite a bit of time there. Marseille, where she was trying to get a visa. Bagnols-sur-Mer, where she managed to cross the border into Spain over the Pyrenees. I went across Spain by train. It's quite emotional, actually. We also followed the route that Walter Benjamin had made over the mountains, or tried to make. It's a strange thing, but I made a lot of the journeys after I had written those parts of the novel. I needed to know if my imagination, my thinking, my being with her had led me to some place. I just needed to confirm for myself. And not a lot changed, actually, after I went. Except maybe this feeling of her presence. Sorry, I'm going to get emotional. It's weird when you live with these figures for so long. Just their presence was very real to me. I had lived in the Netherlands before, so a lot of Spinoza's sections, I knew those areas. I had lived there in my 20s. And of course in China, following Dufu, I didn't go back to China this time, but I had spent so much time in China previously that it kind of all came together.
I think the reason I'm asking about this is because so much of this book is about saying we are familiar with these people as creators of ideas and creators of maybe questions that converge, and like where they're converging is to see, which is to say they're converging over time. Dufu in the 700s, Spinoza in the 1800s, Hannah Arendt in the 20th century. You're trying to sort of locate different echoes of the same questions that you're interested in. So go ahead.
You know, when they came into the sea, I didn't know what the echoes were. I mean, maybe instinctively I had a feeling, but only when their stories were materializing, only when they were deciding what they wanted to tell Lena, did they start to echo across. It revealed itself, to all of us, I think, in the sea. Yeah.
But I think just hearing about the ways that you went to these spaces, in many ways, it's sort of an invitation to say, hey, you've read Spinoza, you may have read Hannah Arendt, you may have read Dufu, but there's something about the way that these ideas occupy space on your bookshelf versus being lived in real life, which is to say that ideas are not the sort of, things that you think about when you're pouring wine on a Wednesday night. Right. You have to live them a little bit tactically. How do you think that changes the writing of this book to sort of exist in those spaces and then say, oh, when they were thinking about these ideas, this was the place where Hannah Arendt was, for example?
It wasn't so... in some ways, I had read so much of them for decades that when I was writing their day-to-day, in a way I had to forget so much of what I knew and just exist with them in the concrete reality, the material, existence that they had. And in a way, it's such an interesting question, because it's like, in a way, the ideas that I knew, as I knew they would later materialize, I was looking for the seeds of those things. I was looking for the encounters that would give rise to a certain kind of question, that would set them on a particular path of thinking, to the things that agitated their soul, which are there from the beginning, or in the encounters they arise. And I felt that they were trying to communicate something to this 10-year-old girl about the things that the unresolved questions she has in this moment. She's lost her mother, she's lost her brother, she's lost her aunt. She doesn't know why they've had to leave. And they're giving her a path to live with some questions that she may never find the answer to, and yet the hope that she can find a way to live with all of it and to hold what matters most to her.
I asked that question because you, over your career, you've been interested in dislocation, in various states, I think, of chaos, in occupation, in dislocation, in dispossession. And those are hard questions to ask, they're often quite difficult questions to exist in, but I think what I take from your work, and I include in this book, is that you're trying to sort of figure out how to wrest a humanity out of a debris of lack of humanity. And I think that's sort of the space and the environment sort of creates this dehumanization. And all the books are different invitations to be like, here's where you can find the humanity. What do you think it is about, let me start with Spinoza, that made him one of your guideposts as you think through these questions?
Yes, Spinoza. I think Spinoza, at a young age, lost his mother, his father, his older sister, his older brother, his stepmother, before he was 21. And he was a very deeply intelligent, devout young man, it seems, very well studied, understood the Jewish teachings, read deeply, asked questions. And he began to believe that God was not what he had been taught. He began to believe that the holy books were stories. And you can see, I think quite clearly that it's a person wrestling with all that the world takes away, and wrestling with what it is to be a mortal being in what could be an eternal world. And a lot of it's about what that means, and then what that demands of us, what that obligates of us, what it means for having an ethics, what it means for the world within us and the sense of belonging to a home, even if our time in this home is so brief. I think those are the questions that thread through all of his works. And yeah, I think that's, and we think of Spinoza as this solitary philosopher in his room, excommunicated when he was 23 because he was deemed a heretic, having to leave his community, having to start all over again. And yet, in the reading that I was doing, one of the wonderful discoveries was learning, which the biographers always noted but never kind of made a point of, was that he always lived in these houses that were full of children. We think of him in this quiet room, doing his lens grinding, thinking deep thoughts. But in fact, there were kids running around him all the time. There were families. There were that he must have tried in some way to return to the tight, close community that had formed him, but he had to remake it in other ways.
I like the proposition that you think that we all have a mental image of Spinoza, first of all. I didn't. And so, so this book was kind of foundational to that, so thank you. Raise your hand if you thought, no, don't worry. Okay, we got one person, wonderful. In many ways, maybe the most mischievous figure in the book is the equivalent of Dufu, you know? And at first, Lena has a bit of a protest because she's like, hey, hang on a minute. He never even left his hometown. What could he possibly... Spinoza. What's that? Oh, sorry, that's Spinoza. But that idea, the idea of like pushing back, like, how could you possibly not leave your hometown and then still have something to offer about our understanding of the world? Talk to me about the ideas we prize versus maybe the ideas that we, you know, where we're not looking for value. Because I do think that like this idea of voyager implies you travel the whole world and you returned with, you know, wisdom that you've distilled from different places. Talk to me a little bit about how we prize that.
You know, funnily enough, I think I was thinking about the voyage as what we give passage to. That each of us is a vessel. That in our life we learn many ideas, we learn many things about the world, we carry many ideas about the world, and they manifest in the choices we make, in the ways we move through the world. We are these vessels. And I think I wanted to think about what Lena will decide she is going to be a vessel for. And the three voyagers, they were also the carriers of ideas. I think even though I'm writing about, you know, it's called The Great Lives of Voyagers, but it's the series, but in a way there's a bit of playfulness in the sense that what I was really interested in with those three was the worlds that got carried along with their ideas. The known and unknown times, the known and unknown people. Whom they encountered and who sparked something in them. The conversations that might have passed in a moment but jostled something inside these thinkers. I was trying to mark those moments because I felt like those figures we know, they're like great names, but they're actually the carriers of many, many other lives. And I had this image of many other unknown lives and ideas clinging to these big ships. And it's those things I wanted to find a way for them to exist in the future.
Let me come back to Hannah Arendt in a moment because out of the three, I'm most familiar with her work. Sorry I haven't thought about the inner life of Spinoza before this book, you know? But talk to me about how you settled on Dufu as a vehicle.
I will say that of course it's a very new book and not a lot of people have read it, but I'm surprised at the number of people who have come to me and said, I really want to read Spinoza now. And that makes me very excited. Dufu, yes. Dufu, I consider the greatest Chinese poet to have ever lived. 1,400 poems or more that we know of. Most of them written in the last third of his life after a civil war in China started, a civil war that would displace or disappear a third of the entire population. Devastating. Dufu is quite a remarkable figure because first his poetry is very rigorous, very formal. But he also he kept a record of the everyday. So in this highly rigorous poetic creations, he was documenting his young children, the plants he was growing, an image of his wife when he missed her, friends he visited, the numerous times he got really, really drunk, friends he missed, his struggle to find a job. That's quite a lot of the poetry. A lot. And also a lot of his poems also served as like a CV. Like if he was trying to get a job, he would write to this guy with this beautiful long poem, and that would be like, you know, put me to use, I am a great scholar, you know. So the record that he kept, and then the record that he kept once the war started, of his sorrow, of ordinary people that he met, of being displaced over and over and over again, of trying to go home, of being saved or trying to save another. The people he hasn't heard from in years, he has no idea what's become of them. Yes, he's a beloved poet, and his poems are incredibly transcendental. Yeah.
Funny story, that's also how I got my job. I wrote a poem. That's not true.
That's how I got my job.
Let me ask you about Hannah Arendt. Let me ask you about Hannah because I think Hannah has become, important for a lot of people, newly important for a lot of people, especially in the last 2 years. I think like it's been sort of a return to the moral clarity of Hannah Arendt and just her as a steadying force. And in that spirit, also, like I think about the relatively publicized incident of Masha Gessen, the New Yorker writer, also New York Times writer, who had received the Hannah Arendt Prize, was on their way to receive it in Germany, and they had just published this incredibly lengthy piece about Holocaust remembrance and the ways that memory functions in public. And it was a question mark as to whether Masha would still receive the Hannah Arendt Prize for political writing. Hannah was a difficult, I think, thinker for a lot of people to pin down and say, like, hey, this is where Hannah falls on this political spectrum, because she refused in many ways to sort of be deployed politically. She's a little bit standing outside of the fray and saying, do you not see where this could lead to? I think like that's a recurring question in her work. Talk to me about your relationship with Hannah. How did she come into your life?
Originally, decades ago, in a used bookstore, I came across a book of letters between Hannah Arendt and Mary McCarthy, the novelist. And I was very interested in Mary McCarthy. So I picked it up, and I read the letters, and I fell in love with Hannah Arendt. It's hard to say why. Really no one could be more different to me than her.
What do you mean?
She's extremely witty.
You wrote a book about a place where a building is also time, and it's brilliant, Maddie. I will not have you sell yourself short. But anyway, continue.
She's very sardonic. She's very private. Well, this we have in common. She, and as I read more, and then I read Men in Dark Times, her book of essays about primarily writers, novelists, poets, thinkers. She does quite beautiful biographical essays. She's clearly interested in what it means to tell the life of another. But Hannah Arendt's work was crucial to me when I wrote about the Cambodian genocide and when I wrote about China in the 20th century, because of her writings on totalitarianism and particularly her writings about what it does to the human psyche. What she writes about rootlessness, atomization, loneliness, the iron band of totalitarianism that cuts us off from one another. Sorry, I don't know why I'm so emotional. And it was very moving for me because I felt like she had put her finger on so many things that I was recognizing when I was writing about Cambodian survivors of the genocide. And I also found it fascinating that though when she writes about politics and ideas, when she writes about revolution, when she writes about violence, she never writes about Asia. It never even comes up really as an example. This is through the 60s and 70s. It's quite fascinating to me that in a way, her ideas are so applicable to what would have been happening in the world at that time, but it just doesn't totally register. And I think in that way, I felt so close to her. I felt she had taught me so much, but I also felt that if we were in a room, she might not register my presence. But for a novelist, this is the space in a way in which you thrive, because you can see and you feel a deep connection, but you remain unseen. And in a way that gave me a certain ability to create, and a sense that I did understand something deeply at work in her thinking. And I had applied it elsewhere. And now this was my way to come full circle with both gratitude, but also to try to name other kinds of things as well. She's imperfect, as we all are. But I think what I admire about her is her commitment to the activity of thinking. Not to winning an argument, not to holding the world fixed. She understands we're moving things in a moving world.
That takes me a couple of places. I'll pick one to go to first, because I want to think about this idea of both of you being in a lineage, let's say, of engaging in not just a political idea and its existence, but also the social and very human forces that went into forming it. You know, the idea that no idea is ever just, it doesn't just walk in the room, right? It's sort of born out of political and social factors and pressures. She was interested in biography for that reason, right? Which is to say, what had to happen in order for that idea to form in that way for that person? What had to happen in order for this to take hold in this moment? And that's a social excavation as much as it is an intellectual one. And that's a little bit of what you've done here. And you know what? Maybe I can combine the two places I wanted to go and say that what I was really interested in is if maybe Hannah Arendt might do her thinking by considering ideas and saying, I want to keep this, I want to get rid of this. What you've done here is you've set ideas against each other. You sort of use your imagination to make the ideas have conversations with one another. Is that crucial to your thinking process? Is that how you think through ideas?
Yes. I will tell you that someone I really wanted to live in the sea was the Russian literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin. But he wouldn't.
What a jerk.
I love him still, but you know, something that has been important for me with his thinking is this idea of the dialogic imagination, of how the world, and it's a very Hannah Arendt idea, that the world exists between us. And only when we come into dialogue do we begin to actually see the world, because we are carrying, it is prismatic, we are carrying so many things into contact with each other. And when it comes alive, when it becomes the world that belongs to all of us, it is because we are each adding an angle of view to it. And that the ideas are changing one another. There's a porousness, but say for Hannah Arendt, it's important that we have this space between us. We can't be squished together. We need a bit of distance. We need a bit of not fully understanding in order that there be space, because this space is where we can begin to see the world. Did I go on a tangent? Their lives, you know, so moving to me as I was writing was seeing their ideas in dialogue and their lives in dialogue. It starts to thread together. I was looking, and you kind of alluded to it, I was looking for that sea within us that living, changing world that is porous, that is altered, that like the ocean, there's so many repetitions, but no repetition is ever the same as, there is no repetition because there is no exactness of that return. Ever changing, irreversible, continuous, which I imagine is the inner world as well.
This is the way that time functions in this novel, right? Which is to say, for a moment, suspend your notions of time and put these ideas together because they are echoes of one another, and they're not in agreement with one another, but they're asking the same questions, let's say. And so, just gonna give you guys a heads up that you have about few more minutes, and then it'll be your turn to ask questions. But while we sort of get there, Dufu, Spinoza, Arendt, Thien, what is your sense of the questions you wanted to add to the list of questions they're asking?
To be honest, I feel like my question was the one I probably had as a child, the one that Lena has, which is how am I to live in this world? It's that combination of your heart breaking over and over, but also love for this world, love for the world that is our only home, and to reconcile both what it is and what we wish it to be, and the fact that we won't have it forever. I think that was the question that, for me, linked all of it. How to live in this world, how to choose, how to love.
As a social and political act, right?
As a social and political act, exactly.
Just before I turn it over to you guys, I know I said it'd be your turn, but I lied, I'm sorry. I wanted to sort of read to you a stretch that sort of I think is asking this question here that I think is sort of important to get at. Okay, let me find where I'm trying to get to. Every moment within our minds, she said, changes us into something we can't yet see. She said that every person is housed in the word I and in the word you. Every person, no matter where they lived or when or how. I'm just going to repeat that sentence again because I think there's a lot to sit with here, which is every single person, no matter where they lived or when or how. If you forget everything else, Lena, remember what these words hold. Talk to me about recognizing that shared lack of division, like how that might invite you to move differently through the world.
Yes, it's the epigraph that opens the book. It's an echo of the Martin Buber. I require a thou to become. I require a you to become. It's probably one of the crucial moments of the book when Lena is most struggling to come to terms with everything she learns. And the fear that she won't have certain answers, especially about her family, her mother, her brother. And the Hannah character tells her to see the ones you love in the face of strangers. That everywhere you look, you will see them. Everywhere you go, you will find some trace of them. And I think it's a crucial thing that Lena learns, and in order to go on. But I'd also say that it's kind of the mystery of writing fiction is how strange it is when those passages appear, because they don't really seem to come from me. They really seem to come from something that's at work in the book.
Love that answer. Thank you.